Everybody loves a good conspiracy theory, and some of the old favorites seem to be making the rounds again. In viral TikTok videos, people are claiming once again that the Titanic didn't sink because of a good old ship switcheroo and insurance fraud.
Other crazy theories out there include a multiple murder setup to take out important rich folks and a mummy's curse. So, did the Titanic really sink? Was she cursed? Was it murder? Can we debunk any of these crazy Titanic theories?
Let's dig into this.
If you've been living under a rock for years, you may not know the story of the Titanic, one of three ships built by the White Star Line. She was built side by side with her nearly twin sister ship, the Olympic. They were built for speed and luxury and had accommodations for first, second, and third class passengers. Titanic was one of the largest ships in the world when she was built. They said she was unsinkable due to watertight compartments which could be closed off if her hull was breached.
The Olympic was finished first, and her maiden voyage left the port of Southampton, England on June 14th, 1911, just like the Titanic's maiden voyage would 1 year later. The captain of the Olympic was Edward J. Smith, who would also captain the Titanic's maiden voyage and go down with the ship. Olympic was hugely popular and had made 4 successful voyages before a collision with the HMS Hawke on September of 1911 near the Isle of Wight caused major damage, requiring her to undergo extensive and very costly repairs. The crash would be determined to be the Olympic's fault, so repair costs were not covered by insurance. She would not return to service until November of 1911.
Titanic left port in Southampton, England on her maiden voyage, April 10th, 1912, headed for New York after stops in France and Ireland to pick up passengers. There were approximately 2,200 people on the ship. Around 1,300 were passengers, and many of them were impressive. John Jacob Astor and his pregnant wife, Benjamin Guggenheim, the unsinkable socialite Molly Brown, and Macy's co-founder Isidore Straus, among others.
On the night of April 14th, Titanic hit an iceberg. At least 5 of the watertight compartments flooded. At 12:22 a.m. on April 15th, the Titanic started sending distress signals. We know now that they didn't have enough lifeboats to begin with, and some of the lifeboats were sent without being full. At around 2 a.m., the ship broke in two and sank quickly. Rescue ship Carpathia arrived around 3:30 a.m. and saved those she could. More than 1,500 men, women, and children died.
Conspiracy theories started almost immediately, and they have lived on for over 100 years.
There are a couple viral TikTok videos out there that claim the Titanic didn't sink at all in 1912. The theory says Titanic's sister ship, Olympic, was old, some say nearing retirement, and needed expensive repairs. Because the Titanic was new, it was presented as a unique opportunity for the ship owners. They could swap out the Titanic for the Olympic, sink her, and claim big insurance money, and have the scrap for parts of the wreck.
One supposed proof for this theory involves the number of portholes in a photo of the Titanic when she departed Southampton and the spacing of the windows. It specifically says photos show 16 portholes when the Titanic had 14 and the windows had changed. But it doesn't mention the fact that this photo was taken during her building. And between then and her launch in April of 1912, Titanic had gone through 11 months of work and changes, including reworking windows to provide more light in first class cabins. It also doesn't mention that photos and films of the windows on the wreck of the Titanic match her 1912 photos. Exactly.
Another offer of proof states the publicity photos of the Titanic interiors are really the Olympic, and some of them are. But remember, the two ships were designed at the same time to be nearly identical. Changes were made during construction after the Olympic was damaged, but publicity brochures were already produced by this point.
Each ship had an identification number, known as a yard number, used on most of its parts. Olympic's number was 400. Titanic's was 401. So any switch in ships would have involved the removal and replacement of every part bearing a yard number on the entire ship, which was impossible. Parts from the Olympic sold after she was retired bear the number 400 and have been confirmed numerous times at numerous places that purchase parts of the ship. The number has been found at the White Swan Hotel in Alnwick, England, which is the home of the original first-class lounge of the Olympic, and there has never been a yard number from 400 found on any artifact from the Titanic.
So let's look at the claim of the Olympic was sold and ready to be retired. In a word, nope. She was only months older than the Titanic, and she sailed until 1935.
Oh, and insurance money? Scrap and parts? Well, the Olympic was found to be at fault in her crash, so the owners didn't get a big insurance payout for her expensive repairs. This part is true. But the repairs were made and she went back to work.
Titanic cost 7.5 million to build and was insured for 5 million. So sinking either of these ships on purpose made no sense. And when you think about it, how would you retrieve scrap metal and parts in 1912 in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean? There were much easier ways then to get an insurance payout than deciding to hit an iceberg. This one just doesn't add up.
I love this theory, and it kind of dovetails with the switcheroo theory. In this one, Titanic was supposedly sunk deliberately to kill three of the richest and most powerful men in the world. Businessman John Jacob Astor, the richest man on board the Titanic and worth about $87 million, Isidor Straus, multimillionaire co-owner of Macy's department store, and Benjamin Guggenheim, a mining and smelting magnate, were all said to be opposed to the creation of the Federal Reserve. Many times, J.P. Morgan is said to be the man who set up the murder of these men because he supported the Federal Reserve.
Supposedly, Morgan canceled his trip on the Titanic just hours before it sailed, proving the theory. Other times, rich and powerful people like the Rothschild or Rockefeller families are claimed to be the villains behind the plot. And in some viral videos, this theory goes down a deep and strange rabbit hole and onto other conspiracy claims. We won't go there, but let's look at J.P. Morgan's theory.
The maiden voyage of Titanic was nicknamed the Millionaire Special because so many prominent and rich people were on board, many more than the three we just mentioned. Titanic actually produced a brochure listing all the first-class passengers before it even sailed. And you should probably know J.P. Morgan actually owned the International Mercantile Marine, which owned the White Star Line. So in fact, he owned the Titanic. That part usually isn't mentioned in the theories.
The theory that Morgan would plot to sink this expensive, possibly big moneymaker of a ship before she even launched is almost absurd. There is no evidence that three men on board could stop the creation of the Federal Reserve or even actively oppose it. In fact, Strauss spoke publicly about the creation of the reserve, and there's no evidence Morgan canceled his trip hours before the Titanic sailed. Titanic experts have given numerous reasons for Morgan canceling, from illness to being told he could not bring expensive art pieces on the voyage.
J.P. Morgan was no angel, to be sure, but the theory that he deliberately sent over 1,200 passengers to their doom to ensure the deaths of a few powerful rich men is pretty audacious. When you throw the names of other rich, powerful families into the theory, it just starts to smell like the good old rich folks are evil bashing we've all heard before.
Believe it or not, this one started a month after the Titanic sank. The Washington Post ran a story claiming the curse of a mummy sank the Titanic. The mummy was a priestess of Amun-Ra, and her sarcophagus was supposedly bought by 3 to 5, depending on the source, Englishmen in Cairo in the late 1890s. And the curse of the mummy started.
The men who bought her coffin suffered first. One was shot accidentally, and his arm had to be amputated. Another lost his fortune. One walked into the desert one night and never returned. But the mummy's coffin made it to England, where British museum staff and visitors supposedly suffered a variety of horrible injuries and financial losses.
Finally, it was placed in the Egyptian room with other royal mummies. That didn't seem to stop the curse, though. Madame Helena Blavatsky, a famous authority on the occult, was called in for an exorcism. She said it was impossible. The mummy was evil and would always curse everyone around it.
Eventually, the museum decided to get rid of the mummy and her curse by selling it. No other museum wanted it, of course, so it was sold to an American archaeologist who arranged for her to be shipped on the Titanic to New York. And of course, she caused the ship to hit an iceberg on April 14th, 1912.
This one may be the easiest to debunk, despite the lack for real facts given. The only person ever identified in this story is Madame Helena Blavatsky, who supposedly examined the mummy's sarcophagus shortly before it went to the Titanic. But Madame Blavatsky had died in 1891. The mummy wasn't even discovered until the late 1890s in the story, and the Titanic sailed in 1912. So her involvement is absolutely impossible.
Add to that the fact that no mummy was ever listed on Titanic's cargo lists, and no insurance claim for a mummy was ever filed. This story is probably related to a coffin lid of a possible priestess owned by the British Museum. It has never left the building, and the museum has reportedly never had a mummy positively identified as a priestess of Amun. So this one seems like a good old-fashioned tall tale to us.
It's interesting that these stories are still so popular more than 100 years after the Titanic sank. But then again, everyone loves a good insurance fraud, murder, or mummy's revenge story.
We hope you enjoyed this video. Please remember to like and subscribe.
And we'll see you on the next one.